Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third week of Kerala Architecture Festival, commonly known as Spaces, a festival of culture, politics, and design modeled after Kerala Literature Festival. This week, we are focusing on Kolkata, Chennai, and Mumbai. I am Professor Michi Matthew, Principal, DC School of Architecture and Design, Trivandrum, and I will be co hosting this event tonight. Kerala Architecture Festival is an event promoted by Kizhakemuri Foundation, DC School of Architecture and Design, both Trivandrum and Vagamon campuses, along with DC Books on similar lines of Kerala Literature Festival, one of India's largest literature events. Indian journalist Veer Sanghvi once said, "You want your city clean and green, stick to Delhi. You want your city rich and impersonal, go to Bombay. You want them high tech and full of draught beer? Bangalore is your place. But if you want a city with a soul, come to Calcutta." Tonight, we are putting the spotlight on Kolkata, the city of joy, a city which provided some of the finest thinkers, artists, filmmakers, and writers of India. Kolkata is a city that upholds a perfect juxtaposition between the old world charm and the fast pace of the modern one. Both our speakers tonight, Malavika Banerjee and architect Manish Chakraborthy, are deeply invested in the heritage of this city. Architect Manish Chakraborthy is a Kolkata based conservation architect. He is the director of Continuity, which was founded in 2000, a leading historic building consultancy. Architect Manish Chakraborty has worked as a consultant to World Monuments Fund, National Museum of Denmark, Asian Development Bank, and the Archaeological Survey of India. He played a major role in bringing back to life a 1786 era Danish Tavern, an iconic tourism destination today. Architect Manish Chakraborty's work on St. Olave's Church in Serampore, West Bengal, locally known as the Danish Church, was rewarded the UNESCO Asia Pacific Heritage Award in 2016. He has also been awarded the fellowship from Charles Gott Institute, Italian government, and Cultural Heritage Agency of Netherlands. Welcome, Architect Manish Chakraborty, to the 2021 online edition of Kerala Architecture Festival.
Thank you.
Sports, textiles, and literature, they all sit comfortably in Malavika Banerjee's collection of interests and successful businesses. Malavika Banerjee did her schooling in Kolkata, college in Delhi, and later a master's degree from Jadavpur University. She started her career as a journalist in 1995. Being passionate about sports, she launched a sports marketing company in 1998, Game Plan Sports, which shot to fame as one of the biggest content providers of sports. In 2010, a collaboration between Bailos Safaris and Banerjee's decades worth marketing experience together brought forth Bailu, every sari lover's dream destination. By 2012, Ms. Malavika Banerjee had moved on to literature and hosted the first Kolkata Literature Festival, which has over the years explored linkages between literature and performing arts. Ms. Malavika Banerjee is a through and through Kolkata girl at heart and is deeply invested in the city of literature, home to India's first and only Nobel laureate for literature, Rabindranath Tagore. Welcome to the Kerala Architecture Festival, Malavika Banerjee.
Thank you.
We thank all the online viewers who are present today and we request you to kindly type your queries in the comment box. Once again, let me welcome both Malavika Banerjee and architect Manish Chakraborty to this discussion on Kolkata, the city of joy. Over to you, Malavika.
Thank you, Vijay. Hello, Manish. It's
Hello.
always a pleasure to
Hello,
speak
Malavika.
to. Yes, hi. We would love to have done this somewhere beautiful in Kerala, but sadly, such are our times. It's just
Yeah.
wonderful to at least link with Kerala, Kottayam through this session. I was delighted when Ravi told me about it, and when you were part of the conversation, this became a double delight. So we're talking about Calcutta, the city of joy, a city which is seen through romantic eyes like Veer Sanghvi's, who says it's a city of with a soul. It's obviously called the city of joy. Sometimes it's called the dying city, but in each of these monikers there lies some truth which links the architecture of the city to its character and its destiny. So in your eyes, Manish, as an architect, what is the joy of the city that we call Kolkata or Calcutta?
Yes, I must begin by saying that Miji actually said what I thought will be my introductory remark of Veer Sangvi. Having having Biji already saying it, Calcutta with a soul. I have been after my architectural education. Um, I happened to go to go to outside Calcutta to study conservation of old buildings, and I returned back, having seen that even a milestone in England would be so carefully kept and promoted upon, and the history told and narrated, and reaped benefit out of it, both economically and connecting the present. Um, I came back with these loads of interactions and engagement in England, back to Calcutta, which actually really opened my eyes of seeing the obvious in your city, in the obvious or in your backyard. And I started walking in the streets of Calcutta. In fact, I remember about 20 years ago, about two decades ago, I came back and I had no work. I started this walks in Dalhousie Square. That was about 20 years ago. And only the other day, I met somebody who took my 20 years ago walk, and he was reminding me that how I looked like then, and how I look now. Every street in
Well,
Calcutta,
you've aged as well as Calcutta has.
every street in Calcutta, I would say, every corner I roamed around, it gave me a lot of surprises, as well as a lot of visual delights. Maybe the parts that I have roamed around, and it has always some story to say. So I am not a very big reader, so to say, like most Bengalis are, or maybe most Keralites are, and so my knowledge about the city um, is inquiring of the places that I liked while walking in the streets of Calcutta. So I think that was the beginning, which I got hooked into because I was young then, and younger then, and that engagement, that interaction with the city, really enabled me to know in parts and in pieces, which I later tried to join, and I found more meaning in them. Is basically the history of the city. The history of the city is not necessarily the scholarly work of history, but history as I have seen it, as I have encountered it, and as I have perhaps probed into it a little bit from these pages of PhD scholars, and that mapped onto a map, an architectural plan, which, being an architect, I had to see where is that place that I roamed around yesterday and day before, and then that became a kind of a body of information that I kind of grew gradually, um, and I'm still growing even today. So every street I found, walking along the old traditional North Calcutta lanes and by lanes, or through the main street of Dalhousie Square, which is the city center of Kolkata, which is one of the principal significant, what should I say, the seat of British Empire. Um,
So would
I
you say
found
that is
that,
the part that really exemplifies what
yeah, yeah.
Calcutta's
And
greatest
yeah.
architecture
So,
footprint
yeah,
is?
absolutely. So it was a kind of a mixed baggage. The historians always, that was a fashion earlier to kind of demarcate cities, particularly colonial cities like Calcutta, as a white town and a black town, which is no longer fashionable, and maybe banned to kind of talk about cities in that fashion. And it's a very poor quality of analysis. So vis a vis understanding of soul of the city. Yes, during my interaction, there are soul of the cities, but I think every city has a soul, and so is Calcutta. But what is so special that I had encountered? I would say four or five things, which kind of, to me, uh, kind of typifies the various aspects of Calcutta which I have encountered. There have been many more, because it's always the vantage point that you are looking at, so I will give my vantage point, the way I looked at my city, and so I felt the first and foremost impression that I seen was this central area, which is a large water body, which is called Lal Diki at one point of time, with a lot of old buildings, mostly during the imperial times, prior to the with capital Calcutta was the capital of the British Empire, which is earlier called Dalhousie Square, and currently called, later post independence, was called Binoy Badul Dinesh, who kind of shot somebody who was occupying the writers' building before independence. And that square is full of these colonial buildings in all these Georgian architectural styles or Victorian architectural styles, which kind of stands in a wonderful planning precept in one area. In fact, the square was also a talking point about urban design, of how you position various buildings in relation to a square. Unfortunately, when we go now to any European town, we often see and talk about square, but in Calcutta, the square was a water body, which used to supply water to the city at one point of time. And this imperial Calcutta was not only the capital of current India, it was the capital of the Indian subcontinent, which used to include Burma, Ceylon, and other neighboring countries. Um, the second thing, which kind of as a space and architecture which kind of embodies a space, and which kinds of gives you a kind of a feeling, which gives different feeling to different people. Like for some, these colonial architecture is something that you should abhor. There has been a long years of debate in Calcutta that why should we restore a building which has got this colonial attachment. In fact, I was taking very important people in my walk. There are a lot of different kinds of people used to come, and I remember having taken Mohandas Pai in my walk of Tata Infosys, and he said, "Manish, why shall we restore all these buildings, and why shall we keep them and talk about them? Because they're not ours. They're." So I had that instant answer, which I still is my answer, that heritage is benign. Heritage is benign in the sense that there's no point of hiding your heritage, like the way St. Petersburg does. When I visited that country and I wanted to see where is Lenin's statue, I was not told. And I had to actually walk through Nevsky River and go to the other side of the river to find out his statue and this railway station. So there's no point of hiding your past, which is in this case the colonial past, and rather to use them. And moreover, these buildings are not only built by the English designs and styles, but they're built by the masons of our country. So they're as much a contribution to its creation as much as their idea of an architecture that was implanted in another city. So I think that joint shared heritage was what struck me, and I think that is gaining more and more momentum. Whether it's about your native architecture, whether it's about your folk architecture, your traditional architecture, or an imported idea of an architecture, which can all be there and adds layer to the city, which Calcutta is very difficult to not observe. Any visitors to the city will be able to actually see this potpourri of architectural arrangements in the city, which I think is one of the very essential ingredients about the city. About the transport, I would say it's particularly about the transport. It's a very, uh, uh, when we are having all kinds of speedy transports, we are talking about, very speedy transport like the Trans Europe trains coming in India. We have still, the rickshaws and the autos and the public transport. We are very strong in our public transport, and also trams, which are quite clean, unpolluting modes of transport, and the way they're interlinked. Because Calcutta is a kind of a growing city. If you compare any other cities in India, Calcutta's percentages of road is much lower than other cities. So that makes it a very compact. That makes the city relate to each other, which I feel very unrelated in cities like Delhi, and in Bombay. I don't meet people if I go for 2 days, because you never know when you get stuck in one corner and you actually cannot keep your time. But Calcutta is quite reachable from one place to the other, and as there are different modes of transport, which enabled me to hop in and hop out of a tram, which enabled me to take a short route through the not through the main road but through the side lanes, which are all interconnected, in order to go from north to south, being a linear city, which is the direction that you should. The emblematic Howrah Bridge, which is the connection between Calcutta on one side and the Howrah on the other, um, is perhaps similar to many trading posts, like Liverpool. The relationship of Calcutta and Howrah is Howrah always remained a coolie town for Calcutta to grow. Coolie town in the sense they supplied labor, they supplied hard industrial products for Calcutta to grow. Similar to the relationship of Liverpool to Birkenhead, and many other cities that we can have comparison to. And it's large, that Howrah Bridge, which looms large over the River Ganga, the first cantilever bridge, which I distinctly remember when I was walking through a slum in those days. I got into a house and I found somebody actually drew that bridge on the wall inside the house. It's a small, tiny house, but that was so emblematic that kind of typifies Calcutta quite a lot. Many cinemas, many films actually try to doesn't show the city, but just show the bridge, which kind of immediately reckons which city you're talking about. Literature, cinema, arts, and elderly men or women gathering in a small raised platform near their houses in North Calcutta, in particular, which is the traditional neighborhood of North Calcutta, talking on subjects ranging from football to uh, idealism to Barack Obama to culture. I think that is a fantastic community level thing that has been observed, and it still continues even today. I have not seen many old age home in Calcutta until recently, um, and I think one of the reason, these old towns and the rocks and the adda that is popularly called in Calcutta, are physical spaces, which actually brings in a lot of neighborliness, are actually much more environmentally friendly, are actually give rise to a lot of mutual trading to each other, which we actually spend nowadays in our new development with a lot of money invested in them, trying to import that idea of how to make streets in a housing complex more shaded, more environmentally appropriate, and so on. I remember Balkrishna Doshi, the famous architect, Pulitzer winner awardee, um, actually studied Islam uh, way back before he designed 40,000 dwelling units Aranya project, which is a very successful project, where he actually studied the slum and the way the spaces are grown organically, and tried to replicate and incorporate that idea of how to create a low rise but yet high density housing proposition, which is a very successful model that became our inspiration about 2 decades ago, which is still relevant. And today we talk about United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and so on and so forth. Um, and actually, these kind of settlements, these kind of spaces give a talk or has parameters and objectives met already, which kind of fits wonderfully into these goals.
Great. So,
I still
I
like it.
was just coming. Okay, I'll just cut you here because
Yes, yes,
that we'll be speaking
yes,
only about Calcutta, and as a lover of the city, I too will just keep quiet and let you go.
yes,
But thank you
yes,
for a wonderful, wonderful overview of
yeah,
what you could. You literally walked us through the city through your talk.
yeah,
So, yes. So, you mentioned how the new demands of modern living
yes,
slowly are coming into the architectural framework which existed in the city at, say, independence. So
yes,
what is the balance one has to keep in mind in keeping the march to the future as a priority, but also maintaining the integrity of the architectural past of a city? How do
yeah.
you balance the past and the present?
I think Calcutta's was mentioned as a dying city at one point of time by the former prime minister. And a city is a function of the primary sector, the secondary sector, and the tertiary sector, right? And the tertiary sector is a function of itself. And Calcutta actually didn't die at all 20, 30 decades later. And the overall economy has been not very buoyant all through, but at the same time, it had its own pace. A lot of people interpret this differently, saying that Calcutta is a place where it's much more slow speed and so on and so forth. But that huge amount of investments, which I call it impatient money, uh, actually managed to retain a lot of the character of Calcutta, and its development actually has been more responsive in terms of height and bulk. And the city is quite it's not a tall structure. You can actually relate to even a new modern skyscraper, multi-storied building with the rest of the landscape. It really doesn't kind of become a kind of a see me kind of thing. It kind of merges very well with the new development. So the balance, I think, has been achieved primarily because of not spurt of investments and opportunity investments. And Calcutta always remained a low investment city, and that enabled a lot of buildings to remain status quo, in various degrees of decay as well as opulence, right? And I think they never vanish from the landscape. And before now, where the money is a little more than in the previous years, um, and every industrialist or a newcomer in business has a real estate business. Uh, therefore, 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 there is a kind of a growth, and this is a very interesting juncture that the city is experiencing, and I think there has been a lot of awareness that has been getting built, because as a way forward, that how these investments perhaps can be also invested in this huge percentages of old housing stock, old traditional buildings that can be a part of the development agenda. So I think that is a constant, uh, uh, if not very in the front line, but there has been a growing awareness and a growing frontlining process that is going on and we have got some of the developers, some of the players in the city development process who are taking this up. And I would say in among the all big metropolis in the country, uh, Calcutta's number of buildings getting reused, recycled, repurposed privately is much more than many other cities in the country.
Which brings me
Yeah.
to my next question. When we were being introduced, Spaces is focusing on Bombay and Madras, Chennai as two other cities in this conversation in other sessions.
Yeah.
So, comparing Calcutta to Chennai and Mumbai, how do you think we have done on the repurposing, restoration, reimagining of old buildings? How have we done on this front?
Yeah, I think I think there has been without any consultant or without any awareness, there has been some repurposing done by the owner themselves. Calcutta's heritage stock, uh, essentially, if not 50%, little over 50%, will be mostly individual houses. Owners are individuals, and I think that makes it a very interesting proposition of how the owners which are which are not so well off, or some of them are, is in a position to put his property into some kind of a reuse in relation, and that has been increasing. I would say that has been increasing quite a lot over the past decade or so, if not a decade, at least over the past 5 7 years. um, and there are examples which are very popular across India, from Calcutta. Uh, but asking about your other cities, I think any visitor to the city uh, will will not miss the omnipresence of these buildings uh, in large numbers, which kind of loom large over you. You cannot miss them. Meaning, and you go back only repenting. Perhaps these buildings are. There has been a stage in the evolution of the city that a coat of paint and so on and so forth. But I think the city of Calcutta has woken up much more, and both at the individual ownership level and at the collective level, um, uh, quite a great amount over the past 7 10 years. And in relation to other cities, at least I don't see much examples in Delhi. I do see some examples in privately
Bombay.
led initiative. I do see some examples in Bombay. In Madras, I see more institutional repurposing. Um, I don't see. I am not very aware. I've not been to Chennai and other places for some time, but I hear I hear there has been some efforts, but Calcutta uh, can be Calcutta. This can be the route for Calcutta. Uh, that how to reposition itself, how to reestablish for the present and for the future. Because you cannot always think of the city by bulldozing and building afresh. And I think Calcutta, if you think of bulldozing the city and building afresh in a city like Calcutta, you will you will do a very big massacre, as has been attempted in Singapore, um, and as has been attended in Penang, and so on and so forth. And I think that is very, very important. And I think people are increasingly realizing that. And in this connected world of internet and other places, in this connected world of engagement, I think that is gaining more and more momentum. And I think in this process, this could be a perhaps a very interesting route for another strand, another layering of the city, to otherwise, trying to become a new town, trying to become a high tea hub, trying to become a high rise gated community. Calcutta is another city where there's not much gated housing that I have seen, which I have seen in, say, cities, middle town cities like Bhopal, Ahmedabad, and so on and so forth.
Even in
You know,
parts of Delhi, you have
yes,
that. Yeah.
parts of Delhi. So I think that is also another trait of the city, that it's kind of little amorphous. And there's, long ago Rudyard Kipling said, poverty and pride side by side. I say heritage and modern live side by side in Calcutta.
That's a wonderful thought. So, I just to turn the camera slightly towards myself. Well, the conversation also seems to have done that. You mentioned private ownership of old houses and reimagining and repurposing a place. So, we had bought this house
Yeah,
in my company in Hindustan Park, which has several old houses. And
right.
at the time, I didn't know what was to become of it. I just loved the mosaic floor, which each room had a separate design, and that appealed to me. And it also had those shuttered windows, which was a childhood memory, from the government housing that I grew up in. And later we kind of made it into Bailoom, which is a handloom
Yes,
store,
very
and
famous.
traditional weaves and the traditional, house, the home, somehow was symbiotic. They lived off each other. So the building could survive because by God's grace, the store took off. And we also had a story of revival of looms through Bailoom, where we made a small contribution to getting handlooms spoken about, worn, and the saris coming back in some way. So when that happened, I used to get invited to a lot of talks about repurposing buildings,
Yeah,
but many people say that's not repurposing. That's not keeping the authenticity of a space alive. So do you think it's very hard on homeowners to expect them to live in these old houses with damp and crumbling walls, and it's very expensive to live in an old heritage building? It may look very romantic from the outside. So do you think government policy should aid the whole process of keeping these smaller, more beautiful little houses alive? You were speaking about Singapore. The shop houses have virtually disappeared. So are
yeah,
we in some danger of the less remarkable buildings disappearing from parts of South Calcutta, for instance?
yeah. There has been a lot of demolition of less important building in Calcutta. Um, but and Like what happened in Bombay at one point of time, it's almost kind of finished. You hardly see them in many parts of Bombay. Um, as I was saying, the economic energy in a city like Bombay perhaps was not there, which also didn't destroy so many buildings in Calcutta, which still exist in various degrees of. I think it's not romantic. It's being realistic. Because a famous architect says, when you ask a brick, "What are you good at?" The brick replies, "I'm good in compression." Yeah. And Similarly, when you ask a old building, what gold building, its span, its position, you cannot break all the walls, because then you actually break the whole building, right? uh, but what you can modify is is keeping the original layout of the building. That will be also not being less authentic, right? And I think this purist uh, uh, attitude to restoration and conservation um, should actually be compatible to the kind of building that we are talking about. I mean, its significance in terms of its architecture, in terms of its history, and so on and so forth. So, if we are talking about a multitude of buildings which are, important for the city, for the place, for the neighborhood, locally, nationally, stately, but they're not as significant as,
The
say,
National
Victoria
Library.
Memorial. So there
Yeah.
should be differences of degrees of intervention permissible, um, so that it can be put to some effective use. And I beg, I think can artists are emotional, conservation architects are emotional. So but that doesn't mean that they cannot think about a realistic model of putting a building into an appropriate use, so that the owner doesn't have to live the brunt of maintenance, which kind of outshines throughout the lifetime, right? So I think being sympathetic, being romantic, is one thing, but I think those things can all remain happily, along with being having the required return from these buildings, by putting it into some effective use for living purposes and so on. And there are technological advancement towards that. There are which are all in place, and I think that is no longer that old buildings will always smell damp and will always leak. This is too small an issue which can be resolved, and the romanticism maybe compromised to an extent, but then even the method of romancing has changed. um, uh, I think we need to perhaps
So
redefine
maybe
our.
we should love our old buildings in a different way.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
we should have a Tinder for old buildings of Calcutta where people can just swipe and choose a
yeah,
building
yeah,
and
yeah.
support it.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that's a
but
great
all these
idea, right?
technologies are there. I mean, there are all kinds of nano chemicals and
Yes,
technology
of
which
course.
can be applied, which may not be applied for a protected national monument of, say, Vishnupur group of temples, right? But it can be definitely applied to a, say, grade two buildings, where the sole purpose of its reversing its decay is to put back into some kind of a adaptive reuse, which it gives a return which is compatible to the current
Which
form
brings
of
me to the
living, right?
yeah,
So
which
you
brings
get
me to
both,
the
and I think.
yeah, yeah. So I was going to talk to you about a restoration project which you
Yeah,
were introduced with, which is the Danish Tavern,
yeah,
and
yeah,
how you reimagined and repurposed it, and it's now
yeah.
this beautiful structure in
Yes, yes,
Srirampur, and
yes,
you can go and have a wonderful meal
yeah,
there. You can walk
yeah,
around and
yeah,
look at the church, as well as the very, very beautiful Srirampur
yeah,
College, which
yeah,
has the most wonderful pillars and looks like a college from any part of Europe, or even one of the 19th century schools of the United States.
yeah, yeah,
So how did you can you talk us through briefly, so that we can just take in a
yeah,
couple of other
yeah.
questions before opening
Yeah,
it
sure,
up?
sure, sure, sure.
How did you go about this whole restoration
Yes.
project?
Very, very interestingly, this is the first time, Calcutta's, if you go upstream, there are whole loads of settlements from the European nations. And one of them being a Danish settlement, which is in Serampore. And we have been talking about restoration, and there is a heritage commission instituted by the government who does a lot of restoration with state funding, um, and central funding. Uh, but uh, but somehow or the other, there are multitude of other buildings that we are talking about primarily today, where we're not getting completely addressed, and, and put into some kind of a policy framework. And it is very important and mandatory almost that the government takes the onus and not actually embrace the idea that buildings, instead of being raised, can be thought about for current purposes. Uh, if this thought is kind of accepted, then the government has to act accordingly, as they act for transport by making bridges, and so on and so forth. So I think that there is a reason it needed the National Museum of Denmark to come to Sirampur, uh, and go for a long term initiative of identifying the buildings in a very limited area, to demonstrate that if these buildings are restored, and if these spaces between the buildings are spruced up, to be not spruced up like in any developed country, with a huge amount of um, money being spent on railings and pathways, but spruced up in an appropriate material, it can actually give birth to a lovely space, and actually regain what people were unable to see in its own right. Yeah, hidden behind wrong surfaces, as I say. So that was a 5 6 years project which enabled a restoration of many such buildings. Before the people of the city, the government took note, and then they started participating in that initiative, which is, I think, is was a process of recovering and re-understanding how cities of yours can be put to effective, purposeful, economic use, right? And Denmark Tavern falls into that demonstration. And I think it was a completely ruined building. And my 20 years ago, when I used to walk, I also went to Denmark Tavern and clicked a photograph, which I still had, fortunately, one of those negatives, which came very handy to identify where was that circular staircase, and so on and so forth. And then it was in the course of these 20 years, it kind of demolished and decayed further out of neglect, out of the thought that old buildings are a liability. Yeah. So and it was shown that these, even a building which had decayed to that extent, almost to the extent of being a ruin, can be put back on track, as well as can be actually seen as a driver of economic regeneration of that area, however little it may be. Right. Now, if you compare the investment in that building, and compare the amount of uh, earnings by the city of Sirampur, in terms of that shop and the tourists going and buying cigarettes and other things. Uh, I think that is all calculatable, and I think, Denmark Tavern demonstrated that a building, even to the extent of being ruinous, can be brought back with a critical amount of money, to repurpose in such a way that it can be put to an economic regeneration. And it is now serving a fantastic, it is being maintained, it's been owned by the tourism department, it's been leased off to Park Hotel Group, um, which was a big surprise, because we thought that such a small building of 6 rooms will be taken up by Park, but they took it up for management control, and they are running it, and they started a Fleury's counter, which is also an
Yes.
emblematic of the city of
With
Calcutta
the
to
Calcutta thing,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. And I think, a person going for a morning walk, which otherwise people would not have gone, the citizens of the neighborhood will pick up a fresh bread from the counter across the Denmark Tavern. All these things could be possible, uh, other than other than a revival of an architecture which kind of simple, like all Scandinavian architecture is, uh,
Hmm.
but very, very omnipresent. It really kind of defines the corner very interestingly, and it overlooks the riverfront, which is
So
at
when
the
you're talking about the waterfront, I thought we'll very, very briefly speak
yeah,
about Cochin and what your favorite parts of Kerala are.
yeah, yeah.
Most
I
of
mean,
our
I
viewers are from there, so let's
yeah, I've
give
got a
them
lot of
your view
connection
from
with Kerala.
outside.
Yeah, I got a lot of connection with Kerala. Um, I must say, a great scholar from Kerala. I think he's also from Kottayam. Um, P.T. Nair, Parameshwar Thankappan Nair. Um, he had a son called Munish, and he is no more. He is no more. He uh, he died of a road accident, and he perhaps has therefore built a special extra corner and finds his son in me, who is the namesake Manish. He doesn't go to anywhere, and Parameshwar Tankapannar, I must take a minute talking about him. He has written 21 books on Calcutta. He's a barefoot historian. He came to Calcutta to work for Asiatic Society, uh, and he told his wife that I think I will not be able to return for the coming 2 decades because I have a lot of work here in Calcutta. Um, and that's Parameshwar Thankappan Nair, one of the most revered person that I have ever met in my life. And I remember him. He may be in Kerala today, or he never sees televisions. He's not in webinaring. He doesn't use computers. He still uses his typewriter. I tried to get him a computer. He will not use it. I tried to get a cup of tea on the street vendor. He will not have it. I want to bring him to Flurries. He will not come with me, but he will come to my house and have a cup of tea. Uh, so that is Parameshwar Thankapannaya. Then my family got married to a couple of members of my family got married to Kerala, and I remember having gone to Kerala during our study tours. Um, One of those tours where you don't have much money in your pocket, but you have got all the energy in you, uh, and all the energy in you to see most of the places in the morning and traveling by night in the train, right? So that you don't. So we did that
Sacrifice to
during the
check
tour.
into a
Yeah,
hotel,
yeah.
yes.
So that you don't have to spend on hotels. And that's how we saw Kerala, one after the other. And I think there's a lot of similarity between Kerala and in terms of food habits. Rice, our staple food, um, and climate. We are also, we know how to combat humidity without air conditioning, and we also are very, talkative. We talk about literature. Most of us wear specs because we read a lot, and and I think Kerala and the landscape. I think, the moment we go out of Calcutta towards, say, south of Calcutta, 20 minutes driving away, I see these water bodies which are in Bengal. It's ponds, which kind of part of the overall drainage system of the landscape. Um, Resembles very much to the landscape that many parts of
The
Kerala have.
backwaters. In
The
fact,
backwaters.
Kottayam
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the
yeah.
way the drive from
And
Kottayam to
I think the people are very easy to connect. They're aware, they're worldly, they're intellectual. Um, uh, Other than, cliche things like, not cliche. I mean, other than sports and things like that. But the food, I think there's a lot of good food, but I
Great
think
synergy,
I
yes.
think that is, yeah. I mean,
Anyway, you've given a lot of food of thought for thought to people, so there are lots of questions. So again, I have to
yeah,
cut you. Sorry, but
yeah,
we have to handle these questions as well.
yeah, yeah,
I'll
yeah, yeah.
start with Debanjan Chakraborthy, who's talking. Who asks you, can you relate to 42? Now, 42 is this very large multi-story of I don't know how many floors, 60 odd floors, I think, which is right in the middle of Chaurangi. Please talk us through. You know more than
No,
me about it.
Debanjan, I cannot. I cannot relate to 42. Who can relate to 42? The people who stays there, I think they themselves cannot relate to 42, um, in the sense that how it's kind of sits. 42 replaced an old building, um, after a lot of 42 is a very tall structure, about 40-story building or
Oh,
42-story
I thought
building.
it's even taller.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think it is an experiment. Calcutta has got a very high water table, so there is a lot of technological experiment that went into making that building. Um, it could have been anywhere. It could have been in other cities as well. Well, it is a one-off. I mean, I think I only hope and pray the good sense prevails, that such buildings are prohibited in a city like Calcutta, because it is not you create a problem by your new creation. That is not a good sensible thinking. So you actually do things which are much more sensible in terms of what the soil permits. Then you invest a lot of money on the soil mechanics, on the and investments, and instead of that you can do many other. And I wonder whether they will get the returns that is envisaged, because I think you know there are many places across the globe where people invested with this speculation that they will get back their money. I think 42 is perhaps they have gone wrong with their business plan as well.
Okay. Now, the other question is from, we have several, I'll try to handle as many as possible. Reshmi Ray Dasgupta has asked, is there any alternative purpose for writers as the government doesn't seem to want to move back there? Writers Building was a seat of government and till 2012-13, and now the new government headquarters is elsewhere in a place called Nabanno. So what does that mean for the Writers Building?
The Writers Building is an amazing building. Every one of y'all should know. It's almost emblematic as the Howrah Bridge. Um, this is the building from where this is a Victorian building with all its precepts and motives, where the communists had their headquarters, right? Which is a symbiotic relationship of communism and Victorian buildings, which is fantastic because there's amalgamation. I love this synthesis. Um, uh, I think it's the way the purpose of a writers building, as the government doesn't seem to move back there, that is very, very unfortunate, because it was supposed to be restored, and parts of the office should come back. I don't know really what it finally will embody to, but I only wish that this particular building, which actually sits right in the city center with its beautiful square, which I call, in many ways, the route to political freedom, route to colonial architecture, and route to colonialism in the whole India and Southeast Asia exists there. It's a very, very important place, in the context of Asia and the world. Uh, I only wish that good sense prevails of what they thought initially of coming back with limited number of people. But I think that is not happening. And I think there are other purposes, other quote unquote purposes for which it is not happening. Because I always consider restoration of an old building is only 5% of the problem. It is very important how you want to repurpose, how you want to put it back. That is more important because it can be technically solved if there is any technical glitches for which it is not coming back, right? But what is more important is how the funds will be raised, how what are the uses that the building will put into. Those things, perhaps there is ambiguity amongst the owners, and therefore it has not seen the light of the day yet. But it could have been the world's biggest project after London, Tower of London, which was on fire, Windsor
Okay, so
Castle.
yeah. So now we are now moving out of Calcutta into Darjeeling, and
Yes.
Supriya Nevar has
Yeah.
asked about, do you have a view on the Windermere Hotel, one of the
Yeah.
most iconic colonial hotels of our country,
Yeah.
which is now facing shutdown, I'm told.
Yeah.
Any
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
I love Calcutta and I love Darjeeling. Darjeeling is almost my second home. I
It's your
restore a couple
second
of buildings there,
place.
and um, I'm restoring some buildings in the tea gardens for the Goodrick tea. Um, but the buildings, Windermere, is a very well sensitively renovated and repurposed. It's been a very prime property, um, which is facing closure. I'm not aware of this because I've not been to Darjeeling for some time, at least for a year. But it may be closed because of the pandemic, but I'm sure it'll come back. Windermere Hotel is a I had the I could never ever think of staying in Windermere myself because I get equally good spaces in my smaller houses in Darjeeling of my friends, which are equally stunning. Um, uh, but but um, but for those who doesn't have friend, Windermere is definitely a good option. And I only It's most iconic, as you said, Supriya, hotels of our country, and I'm sure it will remain iconic because it's in a good hand. And I think after the pandemic, when all of us will be vaccinated, um, and we will be able to unmask ourselves, which I think will be by the end of the year. Um, we will be
We'll
able
all
to
head to the hills.
we will be able to go and have a cup of tea, if not stay at Windermere Hotel.
Excellent. So, thank you so much, Manish. I think we are at the top of our hour, and I see a comment from Swaroop Mukherjee, which is a nice way to wind up. I feel the externals of old buildings should always be restored and retained, and the internals, the inside interiors, modernized, keeping the original look intact. This is what happens a lot in Europe. This will at least enhance the historical character of the city. So, this is the great Kolkata conundrum where we don't know how much we want to modernize and how much we want to live in our nostalgic lanes and bylanes. And it is architects like Manish who decides the exact balance of the two. Thank you so much, Manish, for this extremely enlightening talk. And I'm handing back to our hosts now.
Thank you so much. I look forward to visit your city after the pandemic, and also to your architecture school, and see and talk to your students. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, we are
Thank you
both
very much,
open for
sir.
invitations to Kochi, Calicut, and Kottayam, or wherever you will
Yeah.
have us.
Thank you very much. We are all
Thank
definitely
you.
looking forward to meeting you in
Thank you.
college in future.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Malavika Banerjee, as well as architect Manish Chakraborthy, for shedding light on that soul of Kolkata, the city of joy. It was really joyful listening to you for the last 1 hour. You walked us through the bylanes of Kolkata, holding our hands literally, and it was quite an experience. I was amazed by the thorough knowledge. One, yes, as well as the, what should I say, the unhindered flow of words. It was beautiful, you know. And you also let us know the dynamics behind how repurposing buildings, the economic dynamic behind it, as well as architectural dynamics behind it. So thank you very much for that very informative talk, sir. And I would definitely love to have you in college, BC School of Architecture and Design, Trivandrum, as well as the Vagamon campus. Whenever you are in Kerala, you are always welcome to
And you're
come.
most welcome to come to Calcutta as well and talk to my
Thank you.
students in my
Thank you
university.
very much, sir.
Yeah.
We'll be closing today's session now. Looking forward to meeting all of you for the next online session of Kerala Architecture Festival tomorrow at 8 p.m. to discuss the search of a style within the architecture of Chennai with Mr. V. Sriram, the historian. Till then, good night, everyone. Thank you, Malavika and Manish.
Thank you.